dangling participles and or I had a better joke. I'm sorry.
Okay.
It had something to do with diagramming sentences, but neither here nor there. We're going to have some back and forth about the novel and its inspiration. We're going to play a literary game. Then Phil's going to read an excerpt from his novel. We're going to do a Q&A from the audience if you guys have questions. And then we're going to have some cake and some lemonade that Phil is lovely and laboriously prepared all day long. So, if you don't have a book yet, and I know that Doug Green, I believe, is the first person to buy one, ladies and gentlemen. They're available at the checkout, and we were all given instructions that we will follow to the letter. Okay, I'm not playing around here. Phil Adamo has had many jobs in his life, including circus clown, graphic designer, truck driver, sandwich maker, and dog walker. For 2 decades, he was a medieval history professor at Oxford College, where he was named the Minnesota Professor of the Year by the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching. Phil. Phil is the author of numerous scholarly and popular books and articles, including Memoir of a Pilgrimage for 8, New Monks in Old Habits, and The Medieval Church, A Brief History. Since 2019, his focus has been fiction. The Medievalist, 2022, is his first novel. Ladies and gentlemen, Phil Adamo.
Thank you very much. Unaccustomed as I am to public speaking, I want to welcome all of you. Thank you all for coming. I want to thank Magers and Quinn for hosting this. They've been just awesome through the whole thing, and thank you for supporting locally owned independent bookstores. You're doing the right thing by being here. I also want to thank, because this is being videotaped, well, first of all, I'm warning you, it's being videotaped, so control your emotions. But it's going to be linked to the Magers and Quinn site and then to my website, and so other people around the world can see it. And I need to thank some other people around the world who were beta readers, some of the people who sort of test drove the novel. Some of them are here, but some of them are in faraway places. And I need to give a big shout out to a woman named Peta Broadfoot, this is the second time that we've worked together. She's my editor, and she's just amazing. So I want to be sure that this is like officially acknowledged that she had a lot to do with the book. So thanks for being here, and I'm going to ask David. Do you want to stand or?
Yeah, we can do that.
I'll stand here.
Yeah.
And you stand there.
I will awkwardly stand here.
And you have, I don't know, well, like what's next? You have some questions for me?
Well,
we're in conversation, it says on the poster.
It does say that. Publishers say that an author must be able to describe their books in 1 or 2 quick sentences. A tagline, if you will. What's the tagline for your novel, Phil?
Great question, Dave. I know why I'm here. So here's the tagline. White supremacists are weaponizing the Middle Ages. One historian aims to stop them. Now, that's not bad, but you really need to, when you hear it, you need to hear it in that 1970s movie announcer voice. Some of you will remember this, right? That deep, deep voice. In a time when white supremacists are weaponizing the Middle Ages, one historian aims to stop them. So there you go. So just keep that. Yeah, nice. I went through 100 drafts to get it that tight, and I'm still working on it, sort of. So, Dave, any other questions?
Well, yeah. Can you tell us all how the book came about?
Great question. So I'm going to tell you some real things that are happening in the real world, not in the fictional world. In the real world, there are horrible neo-Nazis and white supremacists who've decided to create an identity for their group of people by co-opting symbols from the Middle Ages. A lot of these are Nordic Viking runes that you might be familiar with. Some of them are phrases that come from the Middle Ages, and their whole purpose is to unify their group under some sort of identity, but the identity they're creating is completely wrong. It's an identity that says the Middle Ages was an entirely white history, which is not true. We know that there were lots of people of color. I'll give you just one example. There's a fantastic story from the Knights of the Round Table, from the Arthurian legends, about a black knight, and they describe this knight, and of course he's wearing black armor, but they say his hands were black, his arms were black, his skin was black, his face was black. In everything that you could imagine, he was all black. But what of it, the text says. In every other way, he was a perfectly noble, honorable knight of the Round Table. So this is a very interesting kind of take on people of color in the Middle Ages, and there are many more examples of that. But these white supremacists are out there saying, let's make up an all-white Middle Ages, and we'll use various examples to promote our evil agenda. And I'll give you two examples. In Charlottesville, you might remember, when the Unite the Right rally happened, a young woman was run over by a car, and the person who was driving the car is part of a neo-Nazi group. And he's seen in pictures and photographs before he commits murder with his car, wearing a shield. A lot of these guys wear shields, or they put emblems on their t-shirt, and they have medieval symbols on the shield. So he's saying, you know, I relate to the Middle Ages because it's all white, and this is how we identify ourselves, and they're just horrible, horrible people. There's another awful example in New Zealand, so this is a worldwide phenomenon. A young guy went into 2 mosques and killed over 50 people with some automatic weapons, and on his rifle there was a saying in Latin, Deus lo vult, God wills it, which is a phrase from the Crusades. And so he identified with that in some way and wanted to promote that idea when he was killing Muslims. Medieval scholars, this is another thing that's really going on, we're horrified by this. Historians, art historians, music historians, and we don't like the fact that our discipline that we love and want to promote and want to tell everybody how wonderful it is, that it's being used for these terrible, nefarious purposes. So that's one thing that's happening. Neo-Nazis are using these symbols to promote their agenda. Medieval scholars are trying to fight against that. The other thing that's happening at the same time is that medieval studies, history, music, art history, etc., has long been a pretty white discipline in all sorts of ways. And even white medievalists who recognize this didn't really know what to do about that, and it shows up in all sorts of horrible ways. So, for example, medievalists of color would submit a paper for a conference or for a journal, and the percentage of those papers being presented or published is much lower than the topics that are sort of traditionally white medieval topics. And so there's a big sort of conflict, family aggravation going on in the medievalist community, because there are still some people, and I would have to say my advisor, whom I love very much, who's, you know, God rest his soul, would have been one of these guys who said there's a traditional way to do this, and not that he would never say he's a racist, he's not doing it for racist reasons, but you can't read texts in new ways, you can't introduce new texts or new methods. There's a way to do medieval studies, and frankly, that doesn't work for all sorts of topics that ought to be dealt with, that have to do with women and people of color and a sort of global Middle Ages. So that's a conflict that's happening, and both of these things show up in this novel. So I've tried to take two things that are really happening in the world and to fictionalize them. And one of the things that's in the back of my mind, okay, if you're an ordinary person walking in off the street and you are not a medievalist, you might say, well, neo-Nazis want to dress up like they're going to the Ren Fair. Who cares, right? It seems silly. Or you might say, well, professors and academics are arguing with each other. Well, that's not new, right? What's the phrase? The battles are so bitter because the stakes are so low. So medievalists fighting with each other, that doesn't seem like such a big deal. But both of these things are quite important because we need to find a way to stop the white supremacists from doing what they're doing. Because if they're successful in coalescing around some sort of identity, that makes them more powerful, that gives them more oomph to do the nasty things that they want to do. How am I doing?
You're doing great.
The last thing I'll say is, what I wanted to do with this book is, medieval scholars like me often address this problem by writing articles. And they write articles in medieval journals, or they post on medieval blogs, or they even post things on the Huffington Post or the Atlantic. There have been lots of articles about this. And writing an article is very important to educate people. But my guess is that the neo-Nazis are not sort of damaged by these articles, as well written as they may be. So in my fantasy, I wanted to create a scenario where academics, who are normally sitting at desks in libraries and doing things that academics do, that they would become more active, and that they would come up with a plan that would disrupt the plan of the neo-Nazis, that it would be like in your face to sort of challenge this, and not just from a safe place in the ivory tower writing an article. So that's the sort of background in the real world and how I've tried to translate this into the fictionalized version. So.
Excellent. And this is kind of funny because Phil being my friend, I've heard a lot of this like as he was writing the novel. So it's kind of funny how many of the, like how well thought out this is. It's fun to see you at this point. But what I really want to ask, so this is a book about trying to be anti-racist, Phil. There must be, and since I have read the book, know that there are characters of color, as you also mentioned, who are also involved in fighting the neo-Nazis. How do you as a white dude handle that? You know, there's a lot of contention about white authors writing characters of color, questions of representation. Phil, what's your response to that?
Yeah, first of all, I'll say it's really complicated. And I want to just come right out and admit, in case you haven't noticed, I'm a white dude, and I'm writing a topic that has to have a whole range of characters in the book. They have to be there in order for it to be an anti-racist book. It would be a different book, I think it's sort of boring book, if there are only white people looking at this problem. It's possible, but it seemed more lively and more necessary to have a range of characters, of a range of ethnicities and races and so forth. So how do you deal with that, right? Because I know that there have been all sorts of well-publicized arguments that happen where white authors, I'm writing a book about people who co-opt the culture of other people, and am I co-opting the culture of people that I am not, right, that I don't belong to, and that seems very complicated. I was helped tremendously by doing a lot of research, so I'm a researcher. I thought I'll just research and maybe there's somebody that tells you how to do this in some sort of sane way that isn't as offensive as it might be. And I will say, some people are going to be offended no matter what, but this was my approach. I found a fantastic website called Writing with Color. It's run by between 5 and 10 women of color of all stripes, of many different ethnicities and so forth. And it basically, the premise of the website is to help people who are not authors of color try to write characters of color with some sensitivity, with some empathy. And one of the first things that they say on this website is, you are going to get it wrong, and people are going to be mad. Don't worry, try again, right? It's just the way that life is in the days that we live. But after that, they have some very solid, concrete things to help authors. For example, if you're describing a black person and you want to describe what they look like, there's one tradition that uses all sorts of food adjectives, right? Her skin was like cocoa butter. Her skin was like chocolate. And all of these are fraught with the history of colonialism and slavery, and these are not the words that black folks prefer, according to this website. But they give you a whole range of color words that you could easily have thought of yourself, but they say, use these. And here we're going to show you some pictures of people of various tones, light-skinned black people, dark-skinned black people, and we're going to show you where these color words go. Just tremendously helpful in sort of physical descriptions. And the website has all sorts of, it's sort of set up like a blog, so some writer will say, well, how do I do this? And they will write a blog response to that. And so I'll say, there are a couple of different things that this website does. First of all, it says, you're going to mess up, and okay, everybody messes up. Keep going, get up and try again. And if you're going to do this, you have to do it with some sensitivity and empathy, and here are some concrete tactics that you can use. So I've had a whole bunch of different people read this book. There are Jewish characters in the book. I've had some Jewish friends read it. There are black characters in the book. I've had a black reader. And there are women in the book, and there are people with learning disabilities. There are people with handicaps, and I've tried to find people and just to say, I'm sure I'm not getting this exactly right because I'm not any of those things. I'm most closely related to one of the characters whom you'll barely hear about tonight, who's a middle-aged professor. Okay, there had to be that guy in the book. I needed to know something about one of the characters. But the other characters, the best that I could do was to try to do this with some empathy and sensitivity. And this website was tremendously helpful. Any authors out there who are confronting this problem, I highly recommend it. So, thanks.
Thank you. I know people are excited about this particular part, as am I. They want to hear you read, Phil, but I want to play the literary game first.
Okay,
all right?
Sure.
You hydrate, because that's important. Authors always want to write the great American novel. So I thought we could compare The Medievalist to the great American novel, Moby Dick. The idea is that I'll have you, Phil, read some lines, and the audience has to guess. Is it The Medievalist? Or is it Moby Dick?
Okay, so here's the first one. Were it not for the whiteness, you would not have that intensified terror. Medievalist or Moby Dick? Moby Dick?
Academics.
Wow, okay, you are correct. That is for Moby Dick. Let's see.
Can we stop now?
There's so many more. There's so many more. This work goes on for like half an hour.
Here's the second quotation. A white leviathan, blue oval smirking at us, disappeared toward the horizon. Is that from Moby Dick or the Medievalist?
Gotta be The Medievalist.
Give us a choice. Raise hands.
Medievalist? Oh, not me.
Yeah.
Moby Dick? That is from the Medievalist. Oh, there was a little twist there. Okay, here's the last one. There are 3 chapter titles that I'm going to read to you, and you have to sort of intuit or guess or whatever you're going to do to say, are these from the Medievalist or are they from Moby Dick? The 3 chapter titles are Loomings, The Drama's Done, Knights and Squires. Medievalist? Some uncertain hands are going up. Moby Dick?
For all 3.
Moby Dick? David, did you have an opinion on that?
I'm going to go with the Medievalist.
You are all correct. These chapter titles are in both of these books. trick question there.
but a general trick. Well played. Well played. Let's see here. Phil, would you be so kind as to take questions from the audience?
I think I'm going to read first,
I think that's
and then they might have
Yeah.
questions after that.
Yeah. Do you have a particular chapter in mind, Phil?
I do. I'm going to read from here, if that's okay.
We'll
Thank
let
you.
you take it away.
Thank you, David.
Absolutely, sir.
All right, now somebody who bought a book early, disobeying the rules of Magers and Quinn, they went and just grabbed a book and bought it. And somebody said they were going to find out what chapter I was reading and they were going to read along and mouth the words.
Doug. With a mask on.
But I want to make eye contact with you. So I'm not going to make eye contact with this section. Okay. I'm starting a little bit, not at the beginning, but let me just give you some lead up to this. There's a character named Molly, who is the narrator. She's new to the Yale grad program in history. There's a character named Quentin, who is a black character, and he's a more advanced grad student. They're both in the history department. And there are other grad students who are introduced. Quentin and Molly meet because they're both put in the same study carrel, unbeknownst to either of them. They're put in the same study carrel that is actually the study carrel of their professor, Abraham Kantorovich, who will be mentioned briefly. So that's the sort of background. And this picks up where they're about to go to the big beginning of the year Yale History Department revelry reception, Okay? Chapter 5, Knights and Squires. Come, little rabbit, said Quentin Quick. If you're going to the reception, I'll introduce you. The annual fall reception for grad students in Yale's Department of History took place in one of the larger halls of Beinecke, the other great library on campus. Unlike Sterling, Beinecke was a box. Its modern facade comprised of unornamented, stacked marble cubes. It was the ultima thule to collegiate Gothic. Yet Quint pointed out hidden meanings in its design. The cubes are stacked 15 across, 5 high and 10 deep, a relationship of 3 to 1 to 2, he said. The golden ratio, I said. Quint smiled. We stood under Beinecke's high ceiling. It wasn't the vaulted cathedral ceiling of Sterling, but it was impressive. I looked up at Beinecke's tower of books. It covered several floors, encased in glass, and centrally located for all to see, rather than being hidden away like Sterling's book stacks. Quint told me about a Gutenberg Bible on permanent display on the library's mezzanine. Looking around, I could see many other codices and incunabuli placed throughout Beinecke's exhibit space. At the moment, the library's archivists had dedicated the first floor to the mysterious Voynich manuscript, a beautifully illustrated 15th century codex written in a script and language so obscure that it remains undeciphered to this day. The codex itself sat in a large glass cube, open to an illustration of stars, or perhaps flowers, with replicas of other folios placed around the large foyer, and conjectural descriptive placards accompanying each replica. Grad students began to fill the space. Some stopped to take in the Voynich exhibit. Others were more interested in reconnecting with friends and grad school colleagues, sharing stories of the research they'd done over the summer, or the fellowships they'd just come back from, I guessed. There must have been like 200 people in the hall. 2/3 of them had to be grad students, or maybe very young profs. Quint caught me counting the crowd and offered some stats about the grad program at Yale. According to Quint, Yale's Department of History has 64 profs and roughly 200 grad students. That was a 1-to-3 ratio of knights to squires, masters to apprentices. He said that roughly 1/3 of the faculty were Americanists, with the remainder being an equal distribution of Europeanists, Africanists, and Asianists, representing periods from ancient times to today. A decent crop of interdisciplinary scholars working in environmental history or in women's and gender studies was scattered throughout the room. The professors' attire, echoed by their students, ranged from the cliché tweedy look of movie profs to black pullovers, asymmetrical haircuts, and piercings, the symbols of the radical disciplines. According to Quint, there were 5 medievalists in the department. 2 were Byzantinists, both women. Jane Hathaway studied the impact of the Crusades on the Byzantine East. Vasiliki Kostas specialized in education in the Latin kingdom after 1204, the Fourth Crusade. There was an Egyptian historian of labor throughout medieval Islam, Tariq Salam, who had worked to overthrow the Mubarak regime during the Arab Spring. Alison Stark studied medieval gender politics and taught the Methods seminar. She had just been appointed as a Sterling professor, named for the same guy who endowed the library. It was Yale's highest honor, and she was scheduled to give a big lecture soon to kick off her getting it. Finally, there was Abe Kantorovich, my advisor in Quint's, who had a joint appointment in art history. All of the medievalists held endowed chairs. This meant that the medieval wing was small but important. I watched the crowd pass through the generous buffet set up on one side of the hall as I took it all in. This was like a graze fest that seemed designed to guarantee good grad student attendance, offering much better than just beer and pizza. There were dates stuffed with goat cheese and wrapped in bacon, puff pastries topped with salmon remoulade, platters of artisanal cheeses from France and Germany, beer from Belgium, and wine from Spain and Italy. There were giant bowls of salad, one with mixed fruit, another with tomatoes, mozzarella, and basil, and yet another with tabbouleh. Pita bread had been cut into smaller squares for dipping in hummus, tzatziki, and baba ganoush. It was a feast meant for the nightly class, one that introduced the squires not just to the extravagant diversity of tastes, but to the idea that all of these tastes were available to us as we entered the privileged class of soon-to-be Yale PhDs. My mouth watered slightly at both prospects. Quint touched my shoulder and pointed up toward a corner of the mezzanine. A man in a trench coat stood there, looking down at us. Spy, Quint said. What? I looked up and tried to refocus my glance. No, I said, I mean, like, he is wearing a trench coat, but this is probably propter pluvium because of the rain. I understand propter pluvium, Quint said, but no, that's where Robert Little tries to have one of his CIA analysts killed. Like, what are you talking about? The Once and Future Spy? No? It's a thriller set in the 60s. Little places an assassination attempt right here in Beinecke. I stared at Quint in disbelief. Never heard of it, I said, though it bugs me that, who's the author? Little? He's ripped off T.H. White's title. Rex quandam rex futuram, said Quint. Yes, the Once and Future King, I said. Is this like a medieval spy thriller? Nope, Cold War stuff, said Quint. I'm really more a fan of John le Carré. This is just the campus lore one needs to know. This guy knows a lot, I thought, as a group of 4 women joined us, balancing small plates and wine glasses in one hand as they extended the other in greeting. They all seemed to know Quint, who managed the introductions. There was Mary, who had an Irish last name, but who said she was working on the Holocaust. An elegant, slightly older woman named Steph was researching the role of lesbians in the anti-war movement during World War I. Amy studied Nazi scientists, while Kim researched the impact of internment on Nisei, the children born to Japanese immigrants in the early 20th century. They were all kind and welcoming, perhaps because I didn't pose a threat to them coming from a field so distant from their own. Journalists, Quint said with mock derision. Not a one of them has more than one other language, and none of their topics goes further back than a century, and they call themselves historians. He was clearly playing the teasing older brother to this group, but they weren't going to stand for it. Sarcasm, Steph said, the last refuge of those whose topics have no relevance to the present. Ad hominem, Quint said. Really? Get over yourself, Mr. Dead Language Man, Kim said. Then turned to me. Please tell us that your work isn't tied to this sad excuse for a medievalist. Actually, I'm not sure about my specific topic yet. Quint and I just met in our carol. Our? Amy said. So you're with Kantorovich? Kantorovich, the Holocaust denier? He's not a Holocaust denier, Quint said. He went to that conference in Iran, Mary said. What was it called? The International Conference for Assholes Denying Nazi Atrocities? Oh, no, sorry. The International Conference to review the global vision of the Holocaust. Much more obtuse that way. Academic all-stars like David Duke attended. The KKK guy? Yes, the KKK guy, Mary repeated, as well as your newly chosen advisor, Kantorovich. That was 15 years ago, Quint said. 15, 20, 30? Who cares how long it was? Amy said. I heard Brandeis denied his promotion to full professor because he went to that conference, Kim said. Lucky for him, Yale saved his ass at all, said Mary. They took his attendance at the conference completely out of context, which is what all of you are doing, Quint said. He went to Iran to argue against the Holocaust deniers. To let them just spout off and not offer counter-arguments is irresponsible. Don't be naive, Mary said. To attend that conference for any reason gives it legitimacy that it doesn't deserve. For God's sake, Tony Blair, George W., and the Pope all condemned the meeting as a way to dress up anti-Semitism in academic robes. Be that as it may, Quint said, it takes light to fight the darkness. Kantorovich fights ideas with ideas, not silence. Is that what he's doing with this latest article he wrote for Zuerst? Mary seemed relentless. That was just last spring, not 15 years ago. What's Zuerst? I asked. It's a right-wing fascist magazine, Mary interrupted. Whatever, Quint said. It's published in Germany, but Kantorovich did not write an article for it. He was interviewed. Same difference, said Mary. The interview, Quint said, dealt with Kantorovich's research around symbols, how neo-Nazi groups are co-opting medieval symbols, and how scholars of the Middle Ages could influence that discourse. What sort of obfuscating bullshit is that? Mary almost screamed, then made air quotes when she said, influence the discourse. Why not just outright condemn the use of medievalism to promote white supremacy? So this is what grad school is like, I thought. In that moment, Quint spotted another friend and waved her over. I wondered if she would add more fire to the conversation or cool it down. Leanne, this is Molly. She's Kantarovich's new rabbit. A pleasure, said Leanne. I'm working with Stark on medieval kinship. Do you have a topic yet? Nothing specific, I said. Tell me about Stark. I have her for the methods course. Oh, she'll show you a good time, Leanne said, then gestured over my shoulder to a group of profs huddled around the exhibit case for the Voynich manuscript. That's Stark there, she said, the one holding forth. Even from a distance, I could tell that the others weren't medievalists, since they only nodded at Stark's comments and gestures and never seemed to offer a question or counter-argument. Stark wore wire-rimmed glasses and tortured her auburn hair into a tight ponytail. She was a plain-looking woman, as Mom might have said. One thing to know, Leanne continued, Stark has higher standards for medievalist grad students, especially the women, even if they aren't her advisees. How will she know I'm a medievalist? I asked. She'll ask, Quint said. They all want to be sure which rabbit is theirs. What is it with you and this rabbit shtick? I said. You've called me that 2 or 3 times. Oh, you don't know the story? Quint asked. Groans and eye rolls from the small clutch of women in our group. Please spare us, Quint, Mary said. It's such a tired saw, Steph added. Once upon a time, Quint began, but Leanne cut him off. There's this rabbit that's writing a dissertation entitled The Superiority of Rabbits Over Foxes and Wolves. A fox tried to eat the rabbit, but the rabbit says, oh, please no, come back to my rabbit's den and read my dissertation first. The fox is never seen again. The same thing happens with a wolf. I want to eat you. Please, no. First, read my dissertation, The Superiority of Rabbits Over Foxes and Wolves. And the wolf disappears. Quint tried to retake control of the story, but Steph got there faster. So then another rabbit asked the first rabbit how she's escaped being eaten. And she says, you have to read my dissertation, The Superiority of Rabbits Over Foxes and Wolves. Then the first rabbit takes the second rabbit back to its warren, Mary said, to Quint's consternation. And inside there's a lion surrounded by all these bones, and the dissertating rabbit says, here, she gestured to Quint, as if giving him the cue to tell the story's punchline. Quint scowled and took his time, as if his colleagues had, robbed him of the chance to tell his great story, a story he clearly liked telling by way of initiating the new grad students, in this case, yours truly. The moral is this, he said at last. The title of your dissertation doesn't matter. The topic doesn't matter. The research doesn't matter. He paused for effect. The only thing that matters is who your advisor is. So the lion is the rabbit's advisor, I said. Quint seemed to be expecting more of a reaction, laughter, but he had no time to respond. In that moment, a dark figure eclipsed the last of the evening sun that poured through Beinecke's revolving glass door. Abe Kantarovich entered the room.
Please sip from the water.
Thank you.
You've heard it. Does anyone have questions for the handsome and talented Philip?
Michael,
What's the chance of getting film made of this?
do you know anybody in the film industry?
I hardly know people in music broadcasting.
This is completely unfair, but I did write to Carrie Miller, who does the book show,
Yeah.
and I said, my good friend Michael Barone said that I should. And I've not heard a word back. One thing that's interesting, some people who say that they can help me do that are starting to write emails to me, and they want me to pay them money so that they can help me do that. And this seems a little bit suspect, but I think it'd be great. I think I'll just say, and maybe other people who've read the book, I think it's a very visual book, maybe cinematic. There are lots of scenes that I could imagine watching in a movie, and it seems very, very timely. So if anybody has Jordan Peele on speed dial, and that would be my first choice. But yeah.
Follow-up question, Phil. Have you done any casting, like, just in your head? Anybody that you love?
So the only person that I imagine in the movie that has not yet been made and may never get made is Paul Giamatti as Abe Kontorovich. Paul Giamatti, okay, some Paul Giamatti fans there, and others. I mean, there are lots of beautiful younger actors to play the grad students of all stripes. But Paul Giamatti he's just cool. I don't know. Yeah. Any other questions? Randall Davidson.
Now, are there people in real life that are reflected in this story that we might start guessing who they might be?
Well, probably. I mean, I think it's probably very obvious that people are going to guess that the middle-aged professor who is living this sort of contested career because he does things that he thinks are the right thing to do, but some people don't think that they're the right thing to do. So he's being, what's the word, canceled in a way. People might recognize somebody that they know in that character. And I know, just because, I'll tell you honestly, names are really hard to make up. So I haven't made up any names. I really know a woman named Steph who really is Irish, and she's studying the Holocaust. I mean, these are friends from long ago from grad school, but I'm like, oh, yeah, that'd be good. They're in here. So I'm just gonna, I'm gonna find something. I hope I can find it now. I'll read one little bit to you because one of my former students is here, and I told him I was gonna tell him this. Sorry, talk among yourselves.
You have a number of colleagues that are from Augsburg that are in the audience today. Could they find themselves in this story?
I know that. So well, here's what I love. The English department has gathered here. The former students and other friends have gathered here. The music world has gathered here with some people, sort of peppered here and there.
The worst convocation of all time.
But thank you for behaving in a tribal way, because those are the main themes of this book. So I'm going to just read one sentence from the very last chapter. So there's, I'm trying not to blow this. So a character who's a lawyer says, "I'm Tom Galatano with Horwart, Groven, and Galatano." Now, some of you know Bob Groven, who's the Tom Studies professor at Augsburg, and who's also a lawyer. And Bob and I both had a student named Horwart, and for as long as we've known him, both of us have said that would be a great name on legal stationery. On the shield. So now it is immortalized, and Tom Galatano is a friend of mine from Boston who's also a lawyer. So I'm just not that creative. I'm not that clever. I'm just finding people in the world that have similar names. I'm trying to think. None of I haven't used any of your names as far as I can tell. Yeah. So you might be offended now. I don't know. Patrick.
A question about the medieval research. You did actual research about the symbols of misuse and kind of deconstruction and reconstruction, that sort of thing. Is there much actual research about the connection between some of these movements in Europe and the way symbols are used by some of these American groups?
There's also, I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by actual research as opposed to the fake research that but I think I understand your question, right? And there are connections, and one of the things that any of these white supremacist groups wants to do is to connect with other groups and to say, if we all banded together, we could be some big powerful machine of hate and mess up the world. That is their goal. But it's hard for them to do that because it's a very paranoid life to live. If you are a white supremacist, the cops are looking for you, the FBI is looking for you, whatever the equivalent is in places in Europe and around the world. You're under a lot of pressure to have a secret life, so it's hard to know who the other white supremacists are. And one of the reasons I think that they try to create this fantasy medieval world, the all-white medieval world, is so that they can speak this language. One of the chapters has a whole list of signs that are used, and it's a list from the Anti-Defamation League, from a Jewish group that monitors hate groups. And one of the things that they say is, some of these symbols, right? If you see somebody wearing the Thor's hammer as a necklace, well, they might just be somebody who likes going to the Renfest, and it might be perfectly innocuous. They're a perfectly nice person, but they're really into reenacting history, and that's why they're wearing that. On the other hand, they might be a fucking neo-Nazi. So it's very complicated because a lot of these symbols can be used in law. So context becomes very important. Not sure if that answered your question.
Yeah, I mean, relative to that, we've been driving in rural Iowa and Pennsylvania and Indiana, and it's gotten to the point where when I see the American flag flown in front of a house, I worry.
Yeah, that's a shame. I mean, I'll just say I'm American. I tear up when I hear the national anthem, and that's because of all sorts of associations. I don't know. I've been trying to figure out why I tear up when I hear any kind of music, but I tear up when I hear that, because I know there are all sorts of good reasons to be proud to be an American, and not in some sort of redneck fascist way. So yeah, but yeah, we're in a time now with red states and blue states and MAGA people and all of that stuff, where the American flag suddenly becomes a marker for we're Trump followers, we're right wing, we're extreme. I hear what you're saying. Doug?
Yeah, I'm curious about the American setting, at least of the part that you read, and so can you talk a bit about why you chose Yale? And
yeah, it's a really easy answer. The Voynich manuscript, which is described in here, is a real manuscript.
Right.
And it is a real mystery. Nobody knows what it says. It's beautiful and weird, and it's written in some sort of, maybe it's a language, maybe it's just goofy cursive handwriting that nobody's been able to decipher. That's sort of pivotal to the book, and that's at Yale. So I thought, okay, I'll have the main focus of this be at Yale. But the medievalists go to all of the places that medievalists go. So there's a chapter where they go to the Medieval Academy meeting in Boston. They go to the Kalamazoo International Congress in Kalamazoo, Michigan. So they're traveling around and doing the things that medievalists do. So it's not just in New Haven. So, Brett?
So, how did you decide, or did you decide early on that the art history medievalists were going to lead the vanguard of the anti-racist campaign here? Well, how did you decide that?
Because it's about symbols. And one of the things, I mean, I'm hoping that you'll, I won't say that. So the Nazis are very interested in symbols, right? And I try to imagine evil neo-Nazis sitting around going, okay, we need something like the swastika, but without all the baggage, right? And we need something like brown's a good color. Brown's a good color for fascists. Boots, Doc Marten boots. Okay, yeah, Doc Marten boots would be good. And they're trying to sort of figure out what are they going to wear to the next rally to identify as fascist, white supremacist, neo-Nazis. And that's all about the image. It's all about symbols and what do symbols mean. So it seemed like it had to be art historians using symbols to fight against that, which is the main sort of arc of the story. Yeah.
Not symbologists like in Dan Brown's.
I'm going to turn to Phil Klumbeck, who's an expert on symbology. We've had many jokes about the fact that symbology is not a real thing, but it's making Dan Brown a lot of money. So what the hell? So there's if Dan Brown wrote this book, it would be full of symbology, and it would be a movie directed by Ron Howard. But there you go. One last question for
The
somebody.
name Vasiliki, where did you come up with that?
I know. I needed somebody who was an expert on the Byzantine Empire, which is now Greece and Turkey, and other places in the East. And Vasiliki was this wonderful. She wasn't really our tour guide. She was sort of the organizer of several trips to Greece and Turkey that Professor Quanbeck and I led many years ago. And it's just a great name, right?
I agree.
It's the name Basil in English. Basilius, and Vasiliki means little Basil. And she's just this wonderful person, and so now I'm using her name shamelessly. And
I love it.
all of you know. So, listen, there's some cake over here. There are books out there, and I think that I've been told by Rachel that I need to go stand by the books, which I will happily do. I'm going to bring a pen, and I'll sign books that you've bought, and it'd be nice to chat with you too. Thanks very much to all of you.